to understand that today's event was successfully brought to us by our lead sponsors, McDan, together with the Bank of Africa. Joy Business, we're proud to be sponsors, as well as other partners as well. It's all about the budget today. I think we have the head of research for the Bank of Ghana to help us understand what exactly the message from the governor is. Ladies and gentlemen, let's cross over live Zoom to get his submission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me first say that I'm giving this short note. It's a very short and brief note from the governor. The governor just started his MPC meeting, the second for the year, and has asked me to just say a few remarks before we begin your discussions. And so, ladies and gentlemen, panelists, invited guests, all protocols observed, let me take this opportunity to welcome all participants to the seminar. And let me indicate that it's always good to talk in a forum like this to discuss issues bordering on the recently read 2021 budget statement is in the right direction. It is only when we are able to discuss issues and pull all synergies together, then we are able to get the best out of every situation. The Bank of Ghana is grateful to the Chamber for extending an invitation to provide these few remarks. I think at the outset, I must say that the key objective of policies is to ensure that both monetary and fiscal policies work together in a coordinated fashion to deliver the key objective of low inflation and stable growth. We all know the challenges the economy went through in 2020. I don't need to recount on these challenges because it's been said on a variety of platforms. But the fact still remains that some of these challenges are still lingering on, and we'll have to deal with these challenges, especially in 2021 and in the first half of 2022. Now, at the same time, these challenges are no excuse to allow the economy move in a certain direction that does not work for us. And we must aim to deliver sound and stable macroeconomic conditions despite the challenges that we have. Now, within that context, within the context of delivering a sound and stable economy in the midst of these challenges, the intention underpinning the macroeconomic framework in the 2021 budget is to ensure that coming out of the pandemic, government will be able to generate enough resources to help support implementation of its programs. In this vein, what the budget has done is to carefully look at expenditure and revenue measures and see what can be done to help put our fiscal finances on a sustainable path. The budget has been crafted in a way, therefore, to ensure that enough primary balances will be generated to return to a positive trajectory to support debt reduction in the medium term. To be able to do this, government has brought on board new revenue measures as well as expenditure containment measures to help achieve this goal. Basically, this is what the budget has done in short: to bring on board new revenue measures, contain expenditures where it can, and generate enough primary balances to support debt reduction. It'll be interesting to also get the views from the panelists, the very fine panelists who have been assembled here, to see what their perspectives are, and also to get from them the feasibility of budget implementation, the realism of implementing these budgets, these policy measures that have been spelled out clearly in the budget statement. Challenges remain, and all these challenges will have to be also assessed while looking at the budget implementation. On our side here at the central bank, we will continue to remain vigilant to ensure low and stable inflation, and also to ensure that the banking sector continues to remain stable to help support economic activity. With these very few remarks, I wish you all the best in your deliberations. And we are also listening keenly on our side here to also take a cue from these independent views. With this, I will yield and wish you the best in your discussions. Thank you very much.
The technical advisor, the head of research at the Bank of Ghana, with his statement there, Philip Bedu. Also, we're so grateful that you joined us via Zoom with your submission. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now time for us to invite onto the stage Senior Advisor to the Minister of Finance, Dr. Samuel Ninoy Ashon, for his brief comments as we gear things up at 10 a.m. Thank you very much. If you could make it to the stage. I think we could do more clapping as he comes for Samuel. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. The stage is yours.
Good morning. Greetings from the ministry. As you all know, the minister is designated. It's not been vetted yet, but it's in faraway US. But we are manning the fort and hoping for its return. But this year's budget has been quite tough in crafting, coming from a COVID-ridden year before the challenges. Revenues have not been very robust. Expenditures on the other side have escalated. And so 2020 was a year where the deficit was one of the highest in recent memory. If you've read the budget, as a result of all the challenges that we have, the national debt before the financial sector bailout and IPP energy payments is about 76.65% of GDP, which is quite high. There's little room in the budget for expensive projects. The growth trajectory of the economy has been brought down. We are on a lower trajectory path of growth, and all the income-based taxes have been affected. So that is why in the budget, most of the taxes are consumption-based, because the industries are hurting. This is not the time to go taxing them. But everybody consumes. And government get a lot of freebies in terms of consumption support last year. Having come out of it, we need to also clean the house and make sure that this economy survives into the foreseeable future, even as we revive the various ailing industries. Government must function, and government functions only on the revenues from taxation and levies and fees. So in as much as it may be not good news for certain segments of the economy or the population, this is a reality that something has to give. But unfortunately, if there are no businesses, There will be no employment. And therefore, we need to protect the businesses. That is why we didn't put a lot of taxes on production rather than consumption, so that the businesses can then be able to revive, employ people, get them working, they earn income, and contribute their quota to the coffers. The vaccine expenditures are going to also be affecting the budget for this year. And if you look at the budget, COVID-19 is not expected to abate until the end of 2023, given the health projection from the Ministry of Health and the Ghana Health Service, although it will be tapering down. So even as we enter 2024, where we expect the deficit to be brought to within the threshold mandated by the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which was set aside in order to contain the COVID as required by law, because the law permits government to set aside the rules set in any particular budget year if there's force majeure, just like we had in COVID-19. But the law also says that we should have a plan to get back to track within a reasonable amount of time. And given this calibration that we had, 2024 is the most likely year that we can come back to some semblance of normalcy. So that is where we are. We are going to be tightening the belt for a while. People should not be expecting huge wage increases in the course of the next few years, because we don't have money to fund those things. When I do my presentation later, you realize that between wages and compensation for employees alone, the unencumbered portion of domestic revenue, what I mean is if you net out all the mandatory transfer, which is required by law, get fund transfer, national health insurance, DACF, if you net out all those ones, the rest which is left to pay wages, salaries, use of goods and services, capital, social intervention programs, that portion alone is not even enough to pay for wages and salaries. In fact, if you pay for wages and salaries, that portion, you are left with about 40% in the whole. So you have to go and borrow to pay for that extra 40%, plus for goods and services, as well as capital expenditure and social intervention programs. Not to mention other government guaranteed debts which have to be catered for. So it is not a rosy picture, and we've got to call a spade a spade. So when people go about saying that there's, we don't need the taxes, government might give this, government might give that, the reality is that the money is not available. And we must well recognize that and work within that tightrope, so that we all have to share the burden, so to speak, to make sure that this nation, this country, does not fall off the cliff. So it may sound gloomy, but it will be for a while. And that is why the budget is calling for everybody on board to do their portion so that this nation can weather the storm. COVID-19 hit us. We didn't invite it, it came on board. We all have to brace it and move forward. So that's the message from the ministry. Thank you.
I think we could give it up for him once again. Such poignant messages that he gave us, the business community, the fact that it is a collective responsibility to ensure that we recover. when it comes to our performance, expenditure, and all the interventions that are in the 2021 budget. Of course, we're grateful once again. He will be joining us as well subsequently with his full presentation on the macroeconomic and fiscal management, as well as its implications on the private sector. Of course, you're still, this indeed is the virtual seminar of the Ghana National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We are live on JoyNews, which is on our multi-TV channel, channel 421 on DSTV, absolutely free to air. And today's session is navigated around the theme of 2021 National Budget, Prospects for Recovery, Resilience and Competitiveness for Private Sector Growth. Of course, we've had a list of presentations so far to kickstart our discussions proper. And I must add that we're thankfully doing this by the kind courtesy of our mainline sponsors, Magdan Shipping Company Limited, together with the Bank of Africa, and of course, other partners. Joy Business, we're glad to be a partner. Ghana Web, we're glad to be partners. And KPMG, we're glad that they partnered this event as well. Ladies and gentlemen, at this particular point in time, it's very imperative for us to have a presentation by Professor Peter Korte. And of course, he's the head of Economics Division, Institute of Statistical, Social and Economic Research, ISA, at the University of Ghana. He speaks on macroeconomic performance and its implications for the business environment. I believe that just before he comes, this should interest us, because provisional estimates from the Ghana Statistical Service do show that overall average real GDP for 2020 grew from 4.9%. I think it's important for us to follow the trend. 4.9% in the first quarter, negative 3.2% in the second quarter, negative 1.1% in the third quarter, bringing the average GDP rate to about 0.2%. Of course, we're having government give us some projections of 5% growth this year, of which economists have been sharing their analysis on. But we'll leave that to Professor Peter Korte to help us understand the remits of the implications of Ghana's macroeconomic performance on businesses. So, ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome him as he gives his presentation. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Let me thank the Ghana National Chamber of Commerce and Industry for inviting me to this presentation. I think I'm honored to be here and excited to be part of this discussion. I had a little accident. My laptop gave up. Yesterday we tried to revive it, and as soon as I got here, it gave up again. So I couldn't use my laptop. But please, next slide, please. Yeah. So I think the objective of the budget is clearly stated. That is to implement measures that will mitigate the impact of the pandemic, with a view to returning the economy to strong and sustainable growth while protecting lives and livelihood, as stated in the budget statement. Next, please. We've seen the world overview. Can it be a bit bigger? I can't see from here. So in the budget, you find the world economy being discussed, a growth of 3.5% in 2020, and it is expected to grow at 5.5% in 2021. Global trade by 3.5% in 2020. We also see in the case of inflation, a lower figure for inflation. For advanced countries, 0.7% in 2020, and then 1.3% in 2021. Now, overview of the Ghanaian economy, the macroeconomic data, the trends. We've seen our GDP for the past 3 years grow steadily till COVID struck. And now for 2020, we are told we'll be growing roughly around 0.9%. That has implications for businesses, because if the economy is not growing, people's incomes are not growing, the cake is not growing, and it's going to affect demand for your products as businesses. So we ought to be interested in growth of the economy. In terms of fiscal performance, you also see how well we've done. We've overrun a budget deficit for several years. Occasionally we see a surplus, but very rare. Mostly we run budget deficits. But deficit has been quite contained until COVID struck. We were hovering around 5–6% of GDP. Now we are told that for 2020, our deficit is 13.7%. That is quite significant. That has implications, because once you have a huge deficit, it has to be financed. It has implications on exchange rate, inflation, and many other macro targets. In terms of expenditure, next slide, we're still talking about the macro, our revenue and expenditure data. There's a decrease in revenue in 2020 as a result of COVID by 13.6 billion, and then unexpected increase in expenditure by 11.7 billion, deficit of 11.7 in 2020, and as I mentioned, in 2021, it's 13.7 billion, sorry, 13.7% of GDP. We have health spending and other payment like water, electricity, free water, electricity, etc. Now, a quick glance overview of the 2021 budget tells us that our projected growth will be 0.9%. Crude oil prices forecast to be around $50. Gold prices are likely to go down, but cocoa will go up slightly to $2,369. And I think I've spoken about the deficit projection. Headline inflation, we are targeting 8% plus or minus 2 percentage points. Then public debt, earlier speakers have spoken about the public debt, which was 76.1% in 2020 due to COVID. But then we are told if you take out financial sector cleanup and then excess capacity charges, we are likely to come down on that. I think our debt-GDP ratio is high, and they need to do something about it. Our medium-term macro targets are also provided in the budget. So overall red GDP growth of 5%, and non-oil red GDP growth of 6.7%, end of period inflation 8%, fiscal deficit of 9.5%. That is by 2024. That is the target that has been set. 9.5, a deficit of 9.5% of GDP, and the primary deficit, as well as our gross international reserves of 4 months of import cover. Next slide, please. What are some of the key recovery measures? The vaccination drive, implementation of Agenda 111, improvement in public sanitation, unemployment support, the CARES program, continuous implementation of the 1D, 1F, they complete the ongoing infrastructure projects, as well as maintain peace and security. In the budget, you see the CARES. I'm highlighting all of this because they have implications for the private sector. So I'll quickly run through them, and then I'll spend a bit of time on the private sector, implications of the macro performance on the private sector. Total revenue. So can we move to the next slide, please? Yes. So total revenue and grants for 2020, you see the statistics being provided, all the details provided. And let's look at 2021 as well. And for 2021, let's go to the next slide. I have a table that would explain things a bit better the way I want to project it. So you see compensation accounting for 26.6%. That is wages and salaries and other compensations, 26.6%. Goods and services, 5.2%. We have interest payments, 31.5%. That is total expenditure, as a proportion of total expenditure. If you compute as a proportion of income, it's about 49.5%. Interest payments alone accounts for close to 50% of our total income for the year, for 2021. And that gives cause for concern. That is why there's a need to bridge that fiscal gap. Taxation has to come in. We need to tax those so we can fill the gap. Statutory payment, 15.9%. Capital expenditure is 10%. Then arrears, 3.3%. Then we have other expenditures, 7.4%. So you see clearly that if you add compensations, then you also add interest payments, that forms quite a big chunk of our total expenditure. Close to 55–60% of our expenditure is in these two categories. If you add statutory payments, we are left with very little for development expenditure. Next slide, please. Interest payments account for 49.5% of total revenue, as I mentioned. Then you find compensation also accounting for 41.84% of total revenue. So the two alone, basically, is over 90% of our total revenue goes into this. It tells you there's very little left for government, little fiscal. The fiscal space is highly or very limited. That is why we keep borrowing. We have to borrow to finance capital expenditure. After paying for wages and salaries and interest payments to fix our roads, so we have to borrow. Then comes with high interest payments. So it's like a cycle. We have a vicious cycle where we borrow, we spend, we pay high interest, limited fiscal space, we go back again and borrow and spend. So that explains the kind of economy we have been running for several decades now. The way out of this is for us to raise more revenue. Once we do that, then we'll minimize such effects. So the details of the revenue and grants, etc., have been provided. Now, how do we finance this? What are the financing tools? What are the policies? Now, I read the IMF World Bank publication, and they propose a tax, a levy. They call it health taxes to boost revenue and support better health. And this levy is on tobacco products, on alcoholic and sugar-sweetened beverages, and pollution fuels. Pollution fuel. So you see in our budget a tax on fuel. It has some basis from the IMF World Bank policy, where you need to levy in order to pay for some of these things. We've also seen a levy to fight COVID. These are all taxes, and you see the details. So direct taxes, you'll find 30% tax rebate on income due to companies in the hotels and hospitality industry. This has implications on private sector, on our businesses, because if you have a rebate, a tax rebate of 30%, that is something that is going to boost that sector. I have heard so far a lot of comments about why the taxes, we are we'll be complaining, but we don't look at the benefits that we are getting. I think the discussion should be more balanced. Yes, government is taxing us, but there are also some benefits that is in the budget. Let's have that discussion as well. To what extent would the benefits or some of the programs affect businesses? The tax rebate is one. The tax stamp system, suspension for some quarters for small businesses, that is going to boost businesses. If you are not going to pay tax for 3 quarters or so, that is a plus. It's going to boost businesses. Vehicle income tax, vehicle owners, car owners, vehicle operators will get some income, and if that tax is suspended, it's something that you take home. So businesses within that sector would flourish within this. Then a waiver on the penalty. If you haven't paid your tax for some time and you have to pay, there's a penalty. There's a waiver on that. That income or that money we would have spent can be plowed back into your business. So it's also good. The financial sector cleanup levy is also noted. Profit on tax, profit before tax. And in that one will bring revenue to government to spend to boost infrastructure and many others. But it's also going to affect the banks, and it may be passed on to customers because, mind you, during the COVID era, banks were requested by the Bank of Ghana to reduce their interest rate by 2 percentage points. That affected their profits. Some of the loans were, loan payments were stayed, they were suspended. A lot of businesses asked that their repayments be rescheduled, and so on and so forth. So already, banks are having challenges with some of these policies because, of course, they need to support the economy, but it's going to affect their bottom line. And I believe this other 5% tax on profit is also going to affect banks in the way they operate, although it will bring revenue for government to spend to boost the economy. There are indirect taxes that the 1% tax on NHIL, upward review of road toll, sanitation and pollution levy, increase in the sector levy to 20 pesos per litre on petrol. These are all taxes that will bring in revenue, but will also have repercussions on consumers, on individual incomes and livelihood, as well as businesses. There have been other measures, such as improvement in the tax compliance, including intensifying audit. In fact, we know that if we have been very efficient in collecting revenue, I don't think we need to increase taxes. A lot of leakages in the system, and we all know, I mean, we live in the communities, we know how much leakages we find in the system. And these indirect measures, if I was quite excited to see it, but if it's going to be implemented to the latter, that will be good. Then we don't have to, in the future, be increasing taxes, but rather be able to collect what is due government. There's a lot GRA can do. I don't think it's being able to do much of that. There are a lot of online businesses now as a result of COVID. To what extent are they able to move online and tax online businesses, online transactions? There's a lot there that they can tax. There's a lot of businesses during the evenings, at night. A lot of bricks business. I ask myself, is GRA aware? Is GRA there? Are they taxing those people? They are making money. It's good to make money, but we need to tax so that we don't overburden the same people. I think tax efficiency is very critical. We find monetary policy. Can we go to the next slide? Next, please. Yeah, the monetary policy is to ensure price stability. It's also quite important because when prices are stable, our interest rates are moderated. When we have lower inflation, businesses can plan. Businesses can be able to plan ahead, make investments, as well as make profits. So price stability is very important to us. If your exchange rate is stable, you're able to plan ahead, you're able to import, produce, make profits, and invest. So that is very critical. The monetary policy objectives are very critical. Next, the sectoral growth, and well, I think I'll skip those ones. Can we go to the next one, natural resource next? And then agricultural sector growth. I mean, if agri grows, it's good for us. Food prices will be moderated, inflation will be moderated. There are a lot of people working within the agri sector who will get jobs, and so on and so forth. So yes, we need to be interested in all of this as well. Can we go to the next one, please? Next. So all the sectorial, are quite important. Next. Yes, implications for the private sector. Implications of these taxes and government policies, the macroeconomy on the private sector. The tax will certainly lead to increase in the cost of doing business. I think we are very much aware. May reduce private sector investment, increase incentive to tax avoidance if you are not careful, because if you overtax the same people, if you are not careful, it may lead to tax avoidance. So it shouldn't just be the tax, but also tax efficiency, trying to get the people that matter, those who collect taxes, to be more efficient in their tax collection efforts. Businesses may pass the increase on to consumers. It depends on the elasticity. I mean, there are some commodities or some business lines, if you pass on to the consumer, they will not buy, they will switch. But if you study the market and see that you can pass on some or it's up to the business to do that analysis and pass on as and when necessary. But one ought to be careful, otherwise you might lose your customer base. Then the other is the rebates, penalties, suspensions. I think I've mentioned that already. That is going to certainly reduce the cost of doing business. If there's a rebate given to businesses, that's going to reduce their cost of business. The banks, in the case of the tax on banks, is certainly going to, they may pass it on to consumers. That can affect financial intermediation, because we have quite a number of people who are not part of the banking system, and we need to get them into the banking arena. If we tax that area and it's passed on to consumers, I hope the banks will not do that. And if they do, then certainly it's going to affect the number of people who engage in financial transactions. And in the infrastructure spending, upgrading transport networks and other infrastructure spending. If it takes longer to cut goods from one point to the other, as businesses, we should be concerned. The government is going to invest in infrastructure, be it soft or hard infrastructure. That is going to promote our businesses. So the implications of this spending would have some positive effects on business, and I think that has to be highlighted. We've seen a lot in the CARES program, the CARES of Atampa program, supporting private businesses with soft loans of 100 billion with other activities. Certainly, if government is able to find the money, I think that will help. I see in that program that government will provide 30% of the funding, and then 70% is going to come from the private sector. But my question is, if the private sector is already struggling, I don't know how well that can be achieved. Perhaps we may have to look at the funding arrangements, because in 2021, that might be difficult. Perhaps in the years ahead, government will be able to get more from private sector to fund this laudable program. Then the other COVID-19 supports that have been highlighted. Of course, let me talk about the road toll. The road toll is also another one that will certainly bring funds to government. That would help reduce some of these challenges of going to borrow from the capital markets and the like. I think there's one thing we need to put in context. We became a middle-income country. Previously, we were a low-income country, so we're getting a lot of concessional financing. Now we have become a low middle income country, so we don't benefit from some of this concessional funding. So if government wants to borrow, it has to go to the capital market, and that is also expensive. I think that has to put in context, and that is where we find ourselves. It's not just Ghana. There are many African countries who are now on the capital market borrowing, and if you are not careful, we'll move back to the debt crisis era. During that era, developing countries were borrowing petrodollar money, and that led to higher interest rates, payments, and debts unsustainability challenges. So I think we ought to put that in context. But then, of course, the road tolls will bring in revenue, although it might also affect business, because if I have to move goods from point A to point B, and I have to be paying road tolls, my cost of doing business will go up. My concern with the road toll, I'm okay with the road toll, because even how much we pay is too low, in my view. I think we need to increase. It's not been increased for quite some time now. My concern with the toll is that some create unnecessary traffic. Why don't we automate the system so that by just get there, off you go, rather than where you get there and then you pay the money, then they look for a change and give it to you. I don't think it will take much. So let's invest in the road toll system and then also get the needed revenue. Sometimes I wonder whether even the monies collected there ends up in government coffers. Some just pay and then move away. A lot of the toll trucks don't even take their tickets. So I wonder whether we increase the toll, but whether we even get enough resources. Let's invest in automation, reduce the human interface. Same with customs, same with other GRA units. There's too much human interface, and that gives avenue for corruption, avenue for negotiation. Our property rates, when they bring the bill, then they write their name on it, call me. Yesterday I saw something from, my son gave me something from the assembly, my property rate. And the guy has written his name and said, call me, gave his mobile number. I mean, call you for what? Let's automate the system and make sure there's little or no human interface. I think that is proper. Okay. So let me move on to my conclusions, and then I'll stop there. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think COVID-19 has brought challenges, and our already limited fiscal space has been challenged, really stretched, and there is a need to raise revenue. I think raising additional revenue is the sure way to go. If we are to continue that process, that vicious cycle of borrowing and spending, and borrowing and spending, it is unsustainable. We'll get to a point the system will come to a halt. We need to raise domestic revenue. And there are several avenues we can do so, and if we make our systems efficient, and I think that is very critical. The reliefs we have enjoyed certainly have to be paid. There is, in economics, we say there is no free lunch. There is certainly no free lunch. When somebody gives you something, it has to be paid for. We are enjoying the reliefs. Yes, at a time where we were down, we were in a very critical moment. Somebody has to find the money. That's not when you think about finding the money. Who pays? Find whatever you can find and save lives. Then you can think about how to recoup. So we certainly have to increase taxes to recover these monies. Certainly, it has implications for businesses. It has implications for businesses. It brings benefits as well as cost, and we need to embrace it. There's certainly the need to broaden the tax base. We haven't done much in that respect. The informal sector, there's a lot of informal sector activities that needs to be taxed. We have not been very efficient in doing that. We have a national identification card or system, which is very good. That is one way by which we can know where people are, what they do, and how to tax them. We need to move ahead with our digitization agenda and ensure that there is more automation, revenue generation, so that businesses are not overtaxed. Businesses, anytime we read the budget, businesses would rather be excited because there are new things that will make them flourish and create more jobs. Ladies and gentlemen, on that note, I will stop and then thank you very much for your audience.
I think we can do it better for Professor Peter Quartey of ISA, the University of Ghana. Some poignant points he raised there, the need for efficiency, even as we delve into the aspect of revenue generation under the 2021 budget. Ladies and gentlemen, we are live on Joy 99.7 FM. And for our listeners on Joy 99.7 FM, you're welcome to the GNCCI, the Ghana National Chamber of Commerce and Industry's virtual seminar on the 2021 national budget. The theme for our discussion today is the budget, the prospects for recovery, resilience and competitiveness for private sector growth. And I'm Charles Aite, a business journalist with the Multimedia Group and host of The Marketplace on JoyNews on Multi TV. And I believe the discussions we are having so far are very fruitful. We are being exposed to the aspects of opportunities that we could rake in when it comes to the 2021 budget. And I believe that one aspect of the budget as well that has so many of us smiling, as we heard from Professor Peter Quartey, has to do with the business support and special initiatives being granted by government under the 100 billion cedi CARES program. And for us to put it all in perspective, we are so grateful that we're going to be joined by the KPMG's senior partner, Mr. Evan Tasari, and he'll be speaking to us, exposing us to the goodies of the 2021 budget and how best to maximize them. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome him as he makes it to the podium. Thank you.
Good morning. Please, just a little bit of correction now. I'm a senior manager with the KPMG before somebody thinks that I'm taking over the position. So I'm with the Deal Advisory Unit. Okay, so can you put it up for me, the presentation slide? So I would be looking at the business support, and special incentives. So I will take us through a bit of, I think we all have lived through the impact of COVID. So we just look at some highlights as to some key areas that we believe the pandemic has had an impact. And then we'll look at what has been the response so far. We'll do a bit of some case study of some other government's interventions. And then we'll look at the, okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So just on my slide, I just put up a bulb just to show that, yes, so after that dark period that we went through, we are seeing some light at the end of the tunnel. So just to indicate that we are just getting out of the woods. So just a story to tell on the first slide. So my presentation will take this outline. We'll look at a bit of the impact where we see some impact on business environment. And then we'll look at some case studies of some initiatives that have been introduced by other governments. And then we'll come back home and look at what our government has done so far. And then we'll look at the budget statement and what opportunities there are for the private sector. And then some concluding thoughts and some risks as to how we can make this work better. So next slide, please. So I think it's a bit difficult to read, but I can see from here. I hope you two can see. So I'm just showing some charts and some numbers to just indicate how the pandemic has had an impact on our business. So you see the Ghana Stock Exchange Composite Index showing some decline from somewhere in March when we recorded the first case, and year to end December, a fluctuation of about 14% in the composite index. So just a loss in terms of the market price of the stock on the market. And then we looked at the exchange rate. Also, you see at the bottom corner there, I think the exchange rate has been well managed throughout the period. If we have recorded less than 5% depreciation as to Ghana US exchange rate, it seems that it's been quite a good job done by the government. I mean, one anticipated that would probably be hitting the double digit, but to keep it below 5% is quite a good outcome. And then on the right, you see the confidence levels, the confidence index that Bank of Ghana generates. And I think periodically we have the consumer confidence and then we have the business confidence level. And so you see where you have the red cycle indicating the month that we registered a pandemic. I mean, somewhere in March, it dropped below 80, far below what we were at the time. So we see business confidence and optimism dropping at the time, but subsequently we've seen it taken upwards, and therefore indicating that there is some optimism in the business community and that things are getting better. Let's go to what the situation looks like in some other countries. So if we look at, I selected 3 countries and how they have also intervened in terms of supporting businesses, SMEs, and there. So I looked at the UK, France, and then Singapore, and I put them into buckets. So you have tax cuts and deferral of tax liabilities. So these have been implemented across some of these countries. So tax being reduced for SMEs or being deferred totally for about a year. We have some of them supporting with grants. So in the UK, for instance, about 25,000 grants to businesses based on certain specific sectors. And some also taking over some payments of salaries for some workers. And then in France, for instance, there is about 10,000 euros for certain sectors. In Singapore, grants to cover rent for some SMEs, so specific support and stimulus packages to help SMEs weather through the challenges. Then there is also business loans. So here, not necessarily direct loans from government, but government providing some form of guarantee for SMEs that are seeking financing from certain financial institutions. So up to 90% guarantee for some SMEs who are earning a certain revenue level. You can go to the next slide. So there are other 3 interventions that have been also introduced by some of these governments. If we look at, there are some that in extreme cases, government had to even take an equity stake in the business. We talked about the airlines. In some jurisdictions, they had to bail out the airlines, and in other ways, just government having some shareholding in those companies. We don't have one, so there wasn't any need for us to do that. Then support for startups and support for exporters. So these are specific interventions. So in the UK, for instance, about £500 million just set aside to fund startup businesses. So these are dedicated support programs for SMEs. And then we have support for exporters that's providing some form of guarantee, so insurance guarantees for exporters. And these are all a raft of measures that they believed would let the SMEs go through the difficult challenges that they were going through. So these just sum up some of the interventions, and there are some that were much more drastic. I mean, some even putting together some conditionality for the SMEs and then businesses to be able to survive through. So we come back home and see what our governments have also attempted to do. Can we go to the next couple of slides? Okay, so back home, what has the government done so far? So we see, of course, the flagship is the CAP-BAS program, which sought to support SMEs with specific funding. And we know a total amount of 750 million committed to that project. I mean, if you look at the request for funding from the SMEs, we know it was more than 10 times what has been allocated. So it was really not sufficient to be able to support the SMEs. And I don't know whether it was, we have done any assessment to see how really impactful this was. If there is any recommendations, maybe we need to look at a second phase of that program, because really some of them are struggling to be able to come back on their feet. So the CABAS program still need to be looked at again. And then we also saw tax reliefs. So there were reduction in the telecommunications tax, the talk tax, from I think 8% to 5%. So to support us in terms of being able to buy data from these telecommunications companies. And then we have the extension of filing dates. We had waiver for donation towards the COVID program and all that. So these were all deductible expenses that businesses could take advantage of. And then government also has initiated the guarantee scheme to support businesses with a $2 billion scheme that is in place for helping enterprises in order to maintain and retain staff. And then there were also a raft of monetary policies from the Bank of Ghana. We heard from the research director from BOG mentioning some of them to be able to help increase liquidity for banks to lend to the private sector. Now, going into the 2021 budget, what is in there for us? Next two slides. So, I think the flagship program is really the Ghana Cares, that's Obatampa program, which really is going to define the path of recovery for the next 3 to 4 years. And that is really the COVID-19 alleviation and revitalization of enterprises support program. That's the Ghana Cares. So I put this into 6 main areas. The first one, of course, is agric, which has been emphasized over time that really is going to be the anchor if we are going to see growth going forward. So supporting commercial agric business. And then the second one being light manufacturing. So focusing on agro-processing, so adding value to what we're producing from the primary level, making sure that we get the best out of the value chain. And then the third one is investing in machinery and tool industry. And then ICT, we've been talking about digitization and automation. I think we need significant investment into this industry to be able to make it work better. And then we are looking at infrastructure. I think little has been said about infrastructure because we are struggling to get money to meet even recurrent expenditure. So infrastructure has really been on the back burner for now, but it looks like with the passage of the PPP Act, it sort of opens up opportunity for private sector to be able to come in and support government in terms of delivering on infrastructure, really, which is critical for some of these programs to be able to materialize. If we have effective telecommunication system across the country, road networks are all in place, then of course logistics and delivery of goods and services becomes easier. So that is critical for us to be able to drive the investment into infrastructure. And then finally, Ghana becoming a regional hub. I mean, we are talking about free continental trade. We are hosting the Secretariat, and therefore it is imperative that we look at how we make our economy the center of attraction within the region, from financial services through manufacturing, through digitization and all that. So these are the 6 buckets that I put the whole Ghana Care program into. Next, please. If we look at specifically, so what is in it for businesses? I put them into 1, what is there in terms of accessing finance for businesses? We have heard of the Development Bank Ghana Limited. That's the National Development Bank that we've been talking about. We know it is going to be a game changer if we are able to get that underway, which we anticipate will have a capitalization of about $1 billion USD to focus really on lending to financial institutions who would also on-lend to businesses at quite a subsidized rate. If we can have that rolled out in the coming year or 2, it would be a game changer to be able to help SMEs access competitive financing, and also would be a tool to help with our infrastructural development. And then we looking at some support for the Venture Capital Trust Fund of about $45 million USD. That's to help startups and then also to invest in businesses that have potential. Then the third way to access finance is also using the GESAL and the Exim Bank, so the Ghana Incentive-Based Risk Sharing System for agrics, really to support agro processors to be able to access financing by providing some form of guarantee for them to be able to access financing. And then also we can talk about businesses, because we need our workers to have some homes to live in or houses to live in. And therefore the initiative to set up a whole national mortgage and housing fund is also quite critical to be able to ensure that we have improved accommodation for both public and private workers. So it is critical that a lot of these activities are put together to be able to generate the necessary funding. The next set of buckets on the next slide, I have institutional reforms. I think it is also quite a good initiative that we have the NBSSI being transitioned into an agency. So it is now Ghana Enterprises Agency to be able to directly support the business sector. We know in the act that set it up, there is some provision for SME fund, some support fund. I think it is critical we highlight that the SMEs at this stage need a lot of support, either in terms of working capital support or even starting up, support. So these are very critical moments for us. Once we have the act, we have the NBSSI going through that transition to be able to become an effective agency to support our SMEs in the drive to resilience and recovery. I've mentioned the PPP Act already. That is also another way to help us to get around our developmental challenges. We can't talk about this without vaccination. I mean, if we are unable to achieve the herd immunity that we want to get our economy running, I think it will be difficult for some of these targets in the budget to be achieved. And so getting the vaccines and getting it, administered by the targets that we are looking at, maybe by end of October, we have the 20 million vaccines already administered. It will be critical to ensure a turnaround. And then the elephant in the room, as I will call it, will be the free trade. We cannot talk about private sector without talking about the continental free trade, because it is going to be the game changer, as I call it. So I have a slide next that I want to just project a bit what opportunities there are for the private sector. So we are talking about a continent of about 1.3 billion people, projected to grow to about 2 billion in the next few years. I mean, that is the market size that we are looking at, with a GDP of about 2.6 trillion, but it could be 6 trillion depending on which one you are using. I'm not an economist, but they have the PPP, they have the real GDP, they have the nominal. So if we look at the 2.6 trillion, I mean, dollars in terms of GDP, that's the size of the economy as a continent that we are looking at. And it opens up a whole lot of opportunities for businesses here. And then we are looking at a continent with a consumer spending of about $1.4 trillion per annum. So that is the extent of opportunity that is available for us as a country to be able to take advantage of this free trade. And so, I mean, it aims at taking away about 97% of tariffs in 5 years' time, and then non-tariffs also in about 7 or so years' time, to be able to eliminate all of these taxes to ensure that goods and services move freely across borders. The question is, are we prepared as private sector to be able to take advantage of this opportunity? Are we competitive enough to be able to compete? Because there will definitely be competition in country, but are we also capable of going out to be able to compete with the rest of the continent? And whether as a country we have developed an overall strategy to support businesses to be able to make them competitive. I mean, these are questions that we need to address our minds to be able to do that. And then, I mean, with this free trade, we know focus is on manufacturing, agro-processing, commerce, finance, infrastructure, and all that. And therefore, there is the need for private sector to start thinking that how do I position myself to be able to take advantage of these opportunities. We are looking at intra-Africa trade. So within Africa, estimate is around 75 billion trade. It is projected to double if we have this thing in full operation as we project it. There is going to be access to middle-income earners across the continent and a large pool of human resources. I mean, we're going to be doing businesses across borders. French-speaking countries, Portuguese. Are we building capacity to be able to go into these countries. When I travel to Togo and I'm unable to communicate, I feel ashamed, but they're able to speak English to us. So I ask myself, why is it that I cannot speak basic French to be able to communicate with them? And these are things we need to start asking ourselves. How do we build that capacity to be able to go into some of these countries? So I would be wrapping up with my thoughts on some key risks, irrespective of all these opportunities and incentives that are available for businesses. There are still risks for us to consider. Some have been mentioned by some of the earlier speakers. So one, financing of this Ghana Cares program. Where is the money going to come from? I mean, that is a big question that we need to be asking ourselves. Already having a deficit we want to plug, and then we now set this ambitious program. Where is government going to get this funding from? Maybe we need to start thinking about sustainable development initiatives. I mean, how we access green funding, how we access green bonds to be able to finance some of these projects that we have. Because there is money out there that is looking out for sustainable development. Government needs to probably start thinking about green bonds, housing bonds, SDG bonds, social bonds to finance our. So it is good we have set up this sanitation levy. We probably need to build a pool of funds to be able to maybe at a point in time raise bonds on the back of those receivables to finance our sanitation issues, because we have a major challenge with our waste management. So these are things that we need to start thinking about. Then the second one is, of course, the impact of the fiscal measures. We've mentioned the fact that, the tax on banks' profit is definitely, I believe, will be passed on to borrowers. And so is it going to increase the cost of borrowing? That's a question that we need to be asking ourselves. And then, of course, we have put some taxes and levies on petroleum products. So are we going to see some impact on consumer price index as well? We want to achieve the 8% inflation target, but is it really achievable with all these taxes being put in place? Then the third one is, of course, the capacity of our local entrepreneurs to be able to scale up and to compete on the international front if we want to take advantage of the free continental trade. And then finally, the ability to secure vaccines. For me, it is imperative. It is the anchor. If we are unable to achieve that herd immunity that we are looking for, we know some countries are experiencing third wave in terms of the COVID-19, and some are going into lockdown. If we are able to turn around quickly, I think getting vaccination and achieving herd immunity cannot be underrated. Thank you, and I look forward to having more interactions with you. Thank you very much.